Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee of the Gloucester County Council. We are live on YouTube so that other people may well be watching. First of all, we need to look at apologies. I do know that Colin Hay has given me his apologies for today. He's got a concurrent meeting. Do we have any others? We have
apologies from Councillor Tipper and Councillor David Bray from Grant Thornton, Councillor Brian Tipper, and I'm waiting on Brenny Fisher.
Right, so Peter Barber from Grant Thornton is going to be leading off as usual from there. Do we have any declarations of interest relating to any of the items on the agenda? No?
None have been received.
Fine, thanks. I'm just going to ask Steve to introduce, I'm not sure that he's, oh yes, he is here. I don't know whether he's opened his video, but our new Chief Internal Auditor. Steve, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. As you all are aware, Teresa Mortimer attended our last meeting and has left the authority, is now retired. And we're pleased to welcome Piyush Vitani, who's on the call and eager and started a couple of weeks ago, and we managed to get the IT all up and running. So by all means, Piyush, say a few words about your first few days, maybe.
No, thank you, Steve, and thank you very much, Chair, for your welcome, and pleased to meet everybody on the committee. I look forward to working closely with the committee as we take our forward and continue and indeed improve upon the services that you have received so far from us. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks, Piyush. And Stephanie will be leading on the items affecting the Internal Audit Service. Right, we're going to go over to what is usually our first agenda item, and that's the Grant Thornton Progress Report, which are on pages 17 to 32 in your packs, which I must assume that you've read. Peter, welcome, and please give us your introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this is item 4 of your papers that starts on page 17. The first of 2 of our reports. This is the progress report, follows the normal format, an update on progress against the audit in question, and then the second part of it is areas for information. In this case, the latter part is just a few slides really introducing the committee to the new VFM approach for 2021. So if I can refer members of the committee to page 20 of your papers, headed up progress at the 5th of Jan. You'll recall that the previous audit and governance committee, at the end of October, I indicated at that juncture that we were anticipating issuing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements of both the council and the pension fund. At that point, there was a few small bits of outstanding work to complete. As part of that discussion, I did indicate that there would be an emphasis on matter in both opinions in relation to material uncertainties in relation to land and buildings and property investment funds held by the pension fund, which was absolutely consistent with what we were seeing elsewhere. Pleased to be able to report that I eventually did give the opinion on both the council and the pension fund on the 18th of November last year, ahead of the 30th of November deadline. In terms of the value for money work, at the same committee, I set out our findings in the key risk areas that we looked at, but indicated to you that we were unable to conclude our VFM work due to the continued outstanding objection in relation to the energy from waste scheme. Subsequent to that committee meeting at the end of October, we did issue updated provisional views to both the council and the objectors on the 15th of December. Both parties were given until the 22nd of January, today, close of play today, to respond with any comments. And clearly, we will consider our position once that deadline has elapsed later on today. And then we will have regard to any further representations before deciding the way forward. So that remains ongoing, but there has been some developments in terms of the provisional views. And as I said, the response deadline is today. In terms of whole government accounts, there has been a technical issue within the central government department for the returns for the whole government accounts that's preventing us from completing that work. The work is on our side is complete. The work on the side of the council is also complete. There's nothing further you can do. We await a fix for an issue that is national and is affecting a large number of councils. We were assured that would have been done by now, but it continues to be holding us up. But rest assured, as soon as that fix is provided by the centre, we will engage back with the council to get that work over the line as well. So that is the position in relation to the 1920 audit and our key responsibilities. In addition to that, we do a small number of certification and claims each year. And at the bottom of page 20 on the left-hand side, you'll see my reference to the teacher's pension, which was signed off ahead of the end of November deadline with some minor amendments.
Sorry, I'm just able to interrupt for a second. Can you also say what the other pages are? Because I don't have the... I'm on a slightly different page than you are. I've got your numbering as distinct from the County Council's numbering.
Ah, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Councillor Parsons, what I'll do then in that case is I'll also refer to, so we're on page 4. I'm conscious the font is really small. So it's page 4 of my papers, headed up progress at the 5th of January. Are you with me on that one?
Yes, can you hear me? I think it's page,
when we go further on.
Page 24 of our papers.
Okay, so I think from what I can deduce then, Chair, because I've got a slightly different pack than the one that came out more recently. So I've got page 20 on the left-hand side and page 4 in very small font, which is the page numbering of my individual report.
If I could just say to Sean and others, if you add 20 to the number you see on the reports, you'll probably get to our page in the sequence. Try that. It's I see it as 24, but yes, go ahead, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, just in terms of concluding on 1920, you'll see on the right-hand side under proposed audit fees that we are proposing some further increases in the fees for the year for both the council and the pension fund. I've provided more detail on the breakdown and the nature of these additional fees in our annual audit letter, which is item 5 on today's agenda. So with your permission, Chair, I will park the discussion around the additional fees here, and I will pick it up again at the next agenda item.
That's fine.
So that then takes me on to 2021, and at the top of this page on other areas, every year we do run these chief accountants workshops that we encourage members of the council, finance officers of the council to attend. Once again, we'll be doing these, but obviously given the continued lockdown, those will be done virtually. So an invite will be coming up shortly to your finance officers. It will be virtual. There will be a number of these workshops where we as a firm will reflect on common issues arising in 1920, but also looking ahead to 2021 and, giving insights and insight into what you might want to consider as part of 2021 close down, including no doubt further disclosures around the impact of COVID. The other key area is value for money, and I'll go through that in a minute. But before I do that, Chair, I just wanted to give a little bit of context to 2021, because in any normal year, I will be bringing the audit plan for 2021 for both the council and the pension fund to this committee meeting. I'm not in a position to do that. We will be looking to provide the next meeting of this committee with both plans for both the council and the pension fund. But it's fair to say that we are further behind than we would like to be in any normal year. As at the end of November last year, which was the sign-off deadline for local government accounts, we as a firm had completed and signed off 55% of our opinions, and we were ahead of the other firms in the sector. I think nationally, the average at the end of November was 45%. As of today, of our 200 councils and pension funds, We've probably signed off about 3/4, 150. So there are 50 still outstanding that we have nationally, and other firms are in similar positions. So our priority remains completing 1920 work. And I suppose that does give a little bit of context to this committee in terms of the fact that we did sign off your accounts on the 18th of November ahead of the deadline. But our priority remains completing those outstanding local government audits. That means that we are coming later to the planning. And as a result, the planning will be later, and it will also invariably impact on our ability to undertake this to the same extent interim testing prior to receipt of the draft accounts. So we will continue to work and engage with finance officers to discuss the extent of our interim work and what that will look like. It may be slightly more focused and less detailed this year. You know, in any normal year, we'd probably do month 1 to 9 or 10 testing on your main transactional systems. It might be slightly different this year. And obviously, we are continuing to lobby centrally for an extension to the deadline. The default has been the end of July, but given COVID, there's lots of talk about the end of September. And there is some noise in the system about the end of November again this year. So we await confirmation on the deadlines. And once we receive that, that will inform our resourcing for the remainder of the year. So I'll just very quickly go on to the VFM conclusion. And I think I've trailed this at previous meetings. So the VFM element, so unlike, you know, a commercial audit of a business where the auditors would just do the opinion on the account and confirm that they present fairly, in public sector and in local government, we have an added responsibility, which is value for money. It's based on, it's not just a review of value for money generally, it's based on criteria set by the NAO. They revisit their criteria every 5 years. They consulted last year and have introduced new criteria for 2021 for the next 5 years. And that is set out in the latter pages of this report. I wasn't going to go through every slide, every page, but on page 25 of my papers, which may be 29 of 9 of yours, there's the new criteria. So the new criteria is governance, which is much broader and is obviously very relevant to this committee. Governance is normally well defined within local government. That's my observation, as it is in the council. It becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of partnership working, whether you're working with different tiers or within local government or with the NHS in terms of public health and health and social care, and obviously with the third sector as well, where with greater collaboration across public sector bodies, governance becomes a little bit more confused and difficult, and it's very difficult to ensure that you get the right level of assurance and you know, decision makers have access to relevant governance, but at the same time that it doesn't become overly bureaucratic and stifles decisions. So governance is an area we'll focus on. Financial sustainability, very similar to what was in the old code, unsurprisingly given continuous austerity and COVID. You know, COVID invariably across councils has increased costs, but to a greater extent there's been a massive reduction in income flows. And I know there's been funding from central government, but you know, even though that funding has been helpful and has provided greater reassurance as the year progressed, given further clarity on the levels, it still hasn't covered off everything. So financial sustainability will be an area of focus. And then there's an all capturing, improving economy efficiency and effectiveness criteria that we'll look at.
We've lost you a bit. Okay.
Okay, Chair. Do you want me to go back over anything at all?
No, just stop there. In looking at the agenda and hearing you say that the audit plans for the year have been delayed until the next meeting, I was thinking we've actually got nothing to approve, actually, in this agenda. But I'd forgotten, and I've been reminded we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting, and also get into the habit, I think, of raising our hands. I don't see with this a function where we press a little automatic hand. So if we could just consider the minutes of the last meeting, which you've had plenty of opportunity to look at. I'm sorry that initially they weren't proofread, but they are now. Could we raise our hands in agreeing the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting, please?
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thanks ever so much. No, there certainly is, to my mind, having parked the question of fees, which always comes up, to item 5, I think the new code of audit practice and the implications of that on page 29, very simply presented there, is obviously very important. And I'm going to invite people to ask questions about that. And I'm sure somebody will ask about the delay in the judgment on the incinerator judicial issue. But I'm going to just invite people to, I've got Ray, I do know Ray, and Sean.
And Steve Wilson.
And Steve. Is that a fair order, Andy, as far as you can see?
It was Steve Mawson first, Sean, then Ray.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll take you first, Steve. Please.
Yeah, Chair, mine was a very, very small one. We have approached Grant Thornton and have confirmed in a second letter to them today that we are seeking a very short extension to that to get our views. That's mostly we've got some work with our external advisors that we just need to finish off. So I've written to John, who's doing the work on the provisional view stuff, to confirm that one, and the second letter has just gone off today. So hopefully that'll come. But I'm only talking about 2 or 3 weeks. So.
Nigel.
Oh, please. Please go ahead, Sean.
To ask, though I understand that the audit is delayed, can I just check that the county council is up straight with all the timetables they have to meet, even though they may be audited slightly later?
Paul, do you want to say anything? No, I think we're okay, if I'm honest, Chair.
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, we're still planning, if we can, to so it's very that's what
Excellent.
Was yes, but you were breaking up quite a bit, Paul.
Yeah, couldn't
okay.
Okay, I've turned my video off, but yes, basically the answer was yes. We're on track to aim for the 31st of May.
Good, very clear that time. Ray, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points on the value for money. This issue of the argument that's going on about the incinerator. I mean, at what stage do we consider this to be vexatious? I mean, it has been going on for years. I mean, it doesn't seem to be, we're not getting anywhere very fast. And I can't understand quite why we just don't settle with them. I mean, whoever they are, that's the first one. So,
Ray, I'm going to ask Peter just to explain about the protocol of this period of opportunity for the complainants, the plaintiffs, to comment on Grant Thornton's consultancy report. What's the protocol here? Are they allowed to persuade you that the findings are different, or is it just a question of the words of your report that they are challenging?
So provisional views are just that. They are provisional views. So the provisional views are shared with both parties, and that's happened. 15th of December, and obviously Steve has referenced a response on part of the council, and no doubt that will be considered along with any other representations. So, you know, it is normal protocol for views to be shared provisionally, to seek views from both parties, and those will be considered before any final decision is taken. So, you know, coming back to earlier comments, there has been some progress since the last audit committee, because the revised, updated, that you'll recall that there was a provisional views issued some time ago, and things moved on in the intervening period, and another set of provisional views have been issued. So progress has been made, you know, and we look forward to receiving representations from both parties. We'll consider those in due course and decide the way forward. So So there has been some progress in my view.
Chairman, can I ask about
that? Go ahead.
Are there any financial implications in all this? I mean, is the authority at risk for any material sums of money as a result of this, when the whole thing concludes?
I think I'd probably distinguish the difference from the objection to the accounts from the challenge that we received in the courts. And if I respond to the challenge in the courts, that's probably easier. And obviously that's gone away. You know, and we've been upheld on the majority part of that. So there's no financial risk on that element. And the other element is about the objection to the accounts. I think it would be unfair for me to comment in terms of the provisional views, because we've been asked not to by Grant Thornton, and I'm trying to respect that position, unlike others. But I think we should. I'm not setting aside any additional contingencies. I think it's worth remembering that energy from waste has been a sizable capital investment and is a 25-year contract. So we will constantly need to be reviewing provisions and the operations of the building. That is a different process from the objection to the accounts, though.
And what I understand is that this committee will be able to receive that final report for us to discuss in public the day before, assuming the county council elections go ahead as planned, the day before PERDA begins. So we will be able to discuss it then. If there is anything to do with the accounts, any effect on the accounts, I think we can be quite confident it's not going to be like Tesco fiddling their accounts. Far from it. You'll be reassured by that, I'm sure, Ray.
I'm sure the fiddling word doesn't arise in the County Council or Accounts Department. However, Chairman, thank you very much for that. I have a further question, just a quick one. As far as the pension fund is concerned, did you have, when you looked at this, when you reviewed it, did you have the benefit of the most up-to-date triennial valuation from the actuary? That's at the 31st of March, I think, Paul, last year.
Do you want me to take that, Chair? Would that be helpful?
Well, you asked Paul, but Peter might be able to reply. Go ahead.
So from an audit perspective, the last triennial valuation from recollection was the 31st of March 19, and obviously that informed the work that we did last summer on the pension fund, and obviously it was heavily influential on the IAS 19 liability that is obviously netted off against the investments to arrive at the net liability for the pension fund as a whole, and subsequently recorded the relevant share of that in the council's accounts. So yes, that triennial valuation was informing the figures that appeared in both sets of accounts at the 31st of March 2020.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just confirm that, Chair, just because the question was directed to me, just for the record, I'll confirm that.
Thank you, Paul. The new Code of Audit Practice, you referred to this, and it's on page 29 in your report. It strikes me that this is fairly important, in fact, very important, and quite a major change. What's the reaction of Grant Thornton to this change of approach? Does it mean you're expected to have a rather more robust relationship with the people you're auditing?
Thank you, Chair. So we do, as a firm, very much welcome the change in the code. The consultation that took place by the NAO, a lot of comments were received along the lines of the VFM, the value for money work by auditors at the moment is quite high level. It's done by exception. So, you know, the criteria that was in place for the previous 5 years, we didn't look at every area every year unless we felt it was appropriate. Whereas the new code will require us to provide commentary and go into some detail and provide narrative, explaining where we think the council is against each of these areas. It will be more in depth and will be more focused on specifics within the council, looking for areas of good practice, but also looking to identify and make recommendations for where we think arrangements can be further refined and improved. You know, interestingly, there'll be no binary yes, in our view, you do have arrangements in place for value for money or you don't. So the binary conclusion goes. And interestingly, the next item on the agenda is the annual audit letter. This will be the last year of the annual audit letter, because we will be doing an auditor's annual report that will go alongside your accounts, that will contain all this much more detailed narrative on the value for money, as well as all our conclusions in relation to the financial statements as well. So we do welcome it. It's more work, so there is an added challenge there for us, given what I've said previously in terms of where we are in terms of the audit cycle. So there is an issue about us having to resource up to deliver this. There are ramifications for the fee, and invariably there will be more questions asked of your officers, who we appreciate are already under considerable pressure given all the other things that are going on at the moment. So there are challenges, but overall, Chair, yes, we do welcome it.
Thank you for that. I think Steve had his hand up. I asked you a question about the relationship. I mean, I understand about the fees. That's whenever there's a change, there's usually an increase in audit fees. But it's the relationship I'm interested in, because underneath a lot of these concerns about auditing, and it's been largely to do with private company auditing. I mean, big firms have gone bust and the auditors didn't breathe a whisper of what was wrong. I wonder if that's something to do with it, given that some county councils have basically gone into liquidation or needed bailing out. I wonder if it's expecting through this means a more robust approach to your relationship with the people you're auditing, and pointing fingers and saying, we don't think your governance in Gloucestershire County Council is up to it, before you put any annual letter out, and if that is the case, that would be really interesting. Steve, you might care to comment and blow that idea out of the water, but I'm wondering where this is all coming from. That's why. Go ahead, please.
Well, to be fair, Chair, I think accountancy bodies have been saying for quite some time that the value for money process, the yes or no process that we go through, isn't fit for purpose, and I think we welcome the more narrative approach that gives a bit more commentary around. I'm not sure, and only time will tell, I guess, on the increase in the financial statement stuff, and we need to make sure that, again, that's fit for purpose. I think we all just about understand some of the terminology in the accounts and the commentary on it. I think we need to think about what do the public see of that, and how do they understand that, and how do we help the public to understand and see that. I also welcome the changes. I think the role of our external auditors has been diminished over the last few years a little bit, and this is a step back to where we need it to be. I think we acknowledge it'll be a little bit more work, but I think in the interest of opening the box on a bit more value for money stuff, I think that's a welcome change. I think you're on mute, Chair.
Questions or comments, please, Andy? In that case...
Sorry, Nigel.
Yes?
Pete Barber's got his hand up.
Okay, final comment from Pete before we move on to item 5.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to respond to your question and Steve's subsequent observations, I think we do need to differentiate between the opinion and the value for money here. I mean, in terms of, your reference to what's happened to some businesses in the commercial sector, there is clearly, as for those of you that have been on this committee for a number of years would hopefully have noticed, the detail and the level of detail that the audit goes into in terms of challenging, particularly those areas of the accounts that are subject to estimation and judgment, has increased, in my view, exponentially those last 3 or 4 years, in response to regulator observations and just the change in the market. So I really do believe that your numbers are subject to much more challenge than they have been in arguably years gone by, and I don't think that changes. That's nothing to do with the new NAO code on value for money. The value for money is not about the numbers in terms of do they fairly reflect the financial position of the council and the expenditure and income within that period. The value for money is about arrangements, arrangements that you have in place. So it is a different aspect and a different element. It will be more in depth. It will be more challenging. I think we are quite challenging of your people already in terms of the accounts. I think we are quite challenging on the VFM in terms of the financial arrangements. Will we be more challenging? Yes, I think we probably will be, and we will be looking to make more recommendations. But I nonetheless think that the opinion is actually very robust and actually arguably provides you as those charged with governments with a lot more assurance than it may well have done, dare I say, 5 years ago.
Thank you for that. Right, are you ready to move on to item 5 and the annual audit letter?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Let me just find my position. Okay, so now I'm on, I think I'm on page 33 now of my papers. Is it 37 that I need to be referring to, Chair, in terms of the...
Yes, 37 is the cover sheet.
Ah, right, okay, yeah, 37. Okay, that's helpful, right. So, so this is the annual audit letter for both the Council and the Pension Fund for the year ending the 31st of March 2020. It's a slightly different document in that it's aimed at a slightly different audience. Most reports that we produce during the audit cycle are for the attention of officers and you as the Audit and Governance Committee. This is a more publicly focused document. It's aimed at your stakeholders and seeks to provide in a more succinct way the main outcomes of our audit for the financial year. And therefore, one of the things we do encourage you to do is make this available through your website. Most of the detail in this annual audit letter should be absolutely familiar to members of this committee, because it's exactly what was discussed in some detail when I presented my findings of the outcome of our audit work back at the end of October. Clearly, the one additional element that I wanted to pick up in here that wasn't covered in the October meeting is the fees. So this commences on page 56 of your papers, where we are setting out for both the council and the pension fund the proposed final fees for 1920. So if we went all the way back to this time last year, January 2020, I brought an audit plan for both the council and the pension fund to this committee. For the council, at that point, I articulated our proposed additional fees at the planning stage. So there was an uplift of just over £18,000 planned at that stage, which really picked up on all those areas that I've referenced in terms of estimation and judgment, work in relation to the pension liability. We used external valuers, auditors and experts to get assurance over your land and buildings, and more focus on that, as well as accounting standards, and also the treatment within your financial statements, importantly, of the energy from waste facility. So there was £18,000 planned at the planning stage. Clearly, that was pre-COVID. And the delay in the deadlines being set nationally reflected the additional challenges that both officers and auditors had in discharging their respective responsibilities. Having completed the audit, we've now reflected back on the totality of work that was required, and we have, it's something we haven't entered into lightly, but we are now proposing a further additional increase in the fee for the county council of just over £14,000, which is set out in a bit more detail on page 57, and the breakdown of it, which then takes the total proposed fee for the year up to just over £107,000. There is a similar scenario in relation to the pension fund that begins on page 58 and then goes on to page 59. At the planning stage back last January, we proposed an increase of just over £4,000 in relation to the sample sizes, but also the additional work that we do in relation to particularly your hard to value investments, level 3. Having completed the work, again, we've now reflected on the amount of work we've spent, and once again, they're only passporting on an element of the additional cost we've incurred. So this is not the total amount of additional cost we've incurred, which is significantly more. But once again, we're proposing a further increase of £6,000, £4,000 of which is in relation to COVID, and £2,000 which is in relation to additional work where we've brought in our own auditors experts to get further assurance over the carrying value of your derivatives within your pension fund this year. So that is something I wanted to communicate to the committee. In terms of justifying this, clearly the contract for both the council and the pension fund is with public sector audit appointments. In order to be able to bill you any additional fees, even at the planning or the procurement stage, I need to submit detailed evidence to public sector audit appointments, which I have done, and only once, and if they approve those additional fees, will I be in a position to bill you. So that is the control mechanism that exists over those additional fees. That's all I really wanted to say on the annual audit letter, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions on the fees or any other aspect of the letter itself.
Thank you, Peter. Who's first, Andy?
Here you, Andy.
Is it Ray or?
It's Ray and Sean. They both
Ray
have their
and
hands.
Sean. Ray, please. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. Reference to the pension fund and property assets. Just to make it clear that you could read from page 38 that the pension fund invests in individual property assets. It doesn't, of course. It invests through managed funds, and of course those managed funds are subject to independent professional valuation. So it's not quite the same as the county council's owned property. It's a rather different beast. The other point, on derivatives, the county council, the pension fund itself doesn't enter into derivative transactions. It's just to reassure everybody, because I know that has come under some scrutiny from some authorities who have done that themselves. We do not, in the pension fund, use derivatives, although some of our fund managers may from time to time use derivatives. I just wanted to make those 2 points clear, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Sean.
Thank you. What I don't fully understand now is to what extent you're able to rely on the audit of the accounts, which are done presumably independently now, because all the funds are managed elsewhere, not by us. So, I mean, do you put any reliance on that, or do you repeat what they no doubt the auditors are doing of the pension fund managers?
So obviously, in terms of the extent to which you're invested in Brunel, we engage with the auditor of Brunel, as well as engaging with individual fund managers. We look for their service auditors reports that comment on their arrangements, but also clearly in terms of getting assurance over the carrying value of investments. You know, there is a triangulation process between individual fund managers. You have a custodian that has an oversight role, so the custodian will independently check an element of those fund managers' disclosures. They would go into different levels of detail depending on the nature of the fund manager. So there is us seeking our own independent advice on the carrying values. We compare that with what the custodian is saying, what the fund manager is saying. We have added controls in relation to Brunel, and cumulatively that seeks to give us enough assurance over the carrying value.
It seems to me there's a lot of duplication there, because presumably Brunel auditors are doing a lot of that. And that I think is worrying. I mean, what you're already saying is you don't rely on the Brunel auditor to do that work. You're going to have you're repeating some of it. I mean, you may be talking to them, but you're not relying on them. I mean, I've no idea who they are. Don't know who the auditors are. That seems to me unnecessary duplication in certain areas.
Well, ultimately, I when I sign my name, at the end of the audit process to say that I'm happy that there's a true and fair view, I need to make sure that I have seen all that evidence to be able to sign that. So we will look to minimise duplication, but we do have to gain assurance over the totality of the assets held by the fund, and that will be slightly different in how we do that depending on the nature of how those are held. Interestingly, the auditors of Brunel Pension Fund are Grant Thornton. They're commercial colleagues, but clearly we have to maintain confidentiality. But we will seek their views on controls, and we will look to see whether the accounts have been signed off and what views have been reached, etc. But nonetheless, we will still seek to go back to third-party assurance and valuations to get confidence over all the carrying values.
I don't know. I'll just leave it. I don't know, Steve, if this is something which we should look at. It worries me that there seems to be duplication going on. I mean, after all, we don't go and ask ICI, their auditors, whether ICI is being correctly audited, for example. Not ICI, let's say Unilever nowadays. But I mean, it seems to me there's some slightly unnecessary duplication going on. I'll leave it like that.
And of course, Sean, if they know it's Grant Thornton, they should take it on trust that they've done the job properly. Ray, I know you're going to make another comment. I'll just pitch in here and say, Peter, this increase in fees, which is, thank you for being so generous in terms of your discounts. This isn't going to be the baseline for the next year, is it? I'll leave that for you to think about and ask Ray to come back, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a further question on page 51, value for money conclusions, where there is a discussion about the children's services. And the bottom right-hand corner, there's a conclusion, which is a bit, I think, sounds to be a bit harsh, but who am I to judge? It says the council did not manage the risk effectively and did not make appropriate use of performance and service quality information, informed decision-making and performance management. This is consistent with the conclusion reached in 2018. I'm not quite sure what the implication is there. I mean, is this a veiled or unveiled criticism of the children's service? And if it is, or if it isn't even, what do we do next? Because clearly this is not a particularly satisfactory report. So could you comment further on that particular part, please?
If I may, Chair. So let me pick up that point first. So the observations reflect the inadequate rating that currently exists within relation to children's services. We're conscious that on that page, where we comment on the arrangements, we reference the inadequate rating that was given a while back, and some of the interim visits that have taken place. But until there's a full reassessment by Ofsted, and you move to a higher category, as part of VFM, we have regard to other regulators' reviews. This is what we're doing in this case. Ofsted have given you an inadequate rating that remains in place, and that is critical of arrangements. We try to be balanced in our views, and therefore we have recognised within this document some of the progress that has been made, but we recognise that further visits have identified scope for improvement, continued improvement, and a need for that. So that is reflecting that observation, and clearly is a reflection of the effectiveness of arrangements in place for delivering this service within the council.
What are you proposing should happen about that? And it says what I put underneath that. What next? I mean, what do we do now? I mean, this is clearly not a very happy report to have. If I received this report from my own department, I would have been somewhat distressed, I have to say. I might think it's fair, but but nevertheless, where does this go next?
Well, it's clearly the council is absolutely aware of the current rating and has copious amounts of action plans and approaches in place to address the concerns that have been raised. And at every visit we'll be looking to demonstrate that it has made improvements. I think maybe officers will be in a better place to comment on how you are responding to the inadequate rating, or how you continue to respond, given that it has been in place for some time.
Sorry, Nigel, can I just interrupt there? Just to let you know that Andy Dempsey from Education is currently on the call, and he has his hand up, so he may well be able to offer some assistance on this point. And Steve Mawson also has his hand up for a question.
Well, shall we ask Andy to speak?
Like to.
Andy, you're there?
Good morning.
Good morning,
Can
Andy.
you
Hello.
Can you
hear that last discussion?
Yes, I did.
Please comment then. Thank you.
Yes, I'll comment directly. I think at the time of the inadequate judgment in 2017 and during the earlier part of the monitoring visits, Ofsted were critical of the performance management and quality assurance arrangements, which is the particular aspect focused on here. if you look at the most recent focused visit and the published letter, quality assurance and performance management is now identified as a considerable strength. And by that, I mean that the infrastructure and range of indicators and quality assurance mechanisms in place in the Directorate are viewed by the regulator as an area of strength. I've not got the focused visit letter in front of me, but it's a matter of public record, and I'm happy to circulate that. That is not to say that all aspects of our performance are good. Although performance has improved, we're not yet where we want to be, particularly on some aspects of repeat work. But I wanted to reassure Audit and Governance that the assurance architecture, i.e. the rigour and scope of our performance management, is actually viewed as a strength by the regulator and highlighted within the most recent focus visit report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Andy. Well, that suggests that Grant Thornton's comment is an historic one. Steve.
Chair, I think, to be fair to Grant Thornton, their hands are somewhat tied on this. I think in terms of their value for money criteria, until such time as we are no longer inadequate, they've got to keep reflecting that it's not value for money. And I've seen this in other places. I've seen this in many other audit reports across the country. It is a frustration, no matter how much progress you make. You could be on the verge of getting out of inadequate, but unless you have that Ofsted rating that removes that inadequate, then Grant Thornton's hands are fairly tied and are fairly restricted to the commentary of the like of which we see in the report today.
Thank you. Yes, it's rather like schools getting inadequate ratings. It hangs over them for years until they get a revised official Ofsted report. In the meantime, things may well have changed quite dramatically. Yeah, it's just unfortunate the way things work out like that. Are there any other questions before we move on to Paul's item on Treasury, Capital Treasury and Investment Strategy? Yes, Peter's going to make another comment and then we'll move on, please.
Can I actually suggest that when Grant Thornton said that they actually put in the date when Ofsted made the comment, and then people will know that it's historic to a certain extent.
Yes.
Otherwise, it reads as if it's. I understand that we can't remove it until Ofsted does it, but it's important to put it into context. And I also think this is just for the members of the public looking in. If officers come in who may not know, if they can just introduce themselves to who they are, because not everybody else will know who they are or where they're coming from. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. Peter, do you wish to comment or?
Yes, please. If I may, Chair, let me just respond, if I may, briefly to Councillor Parsons' observation. So just for clarity, on page 55 of your papers, 51 on the left-hand side, you'll note that in the far left-hand column, we do reference the June 17 inadequate rating in terms of that context. So appreciate the conversation around that, but that is referenced within our report. And Chair, if I may, I know that I haven't responded to your question with regard to the baseline, so just wanted to speak to that as well, if I may.
Please.
So obviously, in terms of the cycle last year, we had a scale fee that we uplifted for the additional work that we now need to undertake to discharge our responsibilities. Our planning work, as I said, is shortly to commence, and as part of that process we will be looking to, as part of that, quantify what we think we need to charge to discharge our responsibilities. I think it's fair to say that across the board we will be looking to bake that into the scale fee, and that will be an uplift. I'm conscious there was a further uplift last year for COVID, and whether to the extent that COVID impacts on our respective responsibilities for 2021 is an unknown quantum at the moment, and clearly time alone will tell as to whether we are physically able to get back into the council and revert back to how we used to discharge our responsibilities in terms of substantive testings and sitting down with finance officers to do that. The other factor that invariably will impact on the fee for next year for the council only is the new value for money approach, and we are in contact with, as the other firms are, with public sector audit appointments to discuss how that will be reflected in fees, but it will be an uplift. I know that public sector audit appointments are also out to consultation on increasing scale fees to reflect the additional responsibilities of the auditor, but there is a lead in time to do that. So any change to the scale fee will not be effective, I think, until 21-22, which will be the fourth year of the contract.
Sorry, Nigel, sorry to interrupt. Can we just pause there a moment? I just need to check whether or not there's an issue with the YouTube feed.
Yeah.
Can I just ask Nigel Bora, are you there? Nigel?
Joe phoned to say she was having connection problems. The YouTube feed is fine in the studio, and you should be able to, good to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Nigel.
Thank you. Yes, okay. I know what you said. I could make a joke about it, but it sounds like a double uplift. One might argue that actually COVID is the new normal, but we'll have that discussion later, I'm sure, when you come to present us with your new scope of audit fees. Let's move on now, Paul. We're looking forward to hearing you on this. I have to say, I think your paper was exemplary and very clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've turned my video off. Hopefully, can you all hear?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Members will recall that this report is one of the 3 reports we take to this committee each year. This report outlines the proposed policies and guidelines that will govern our Treasury management activity during the coming year. In addition to this report, we take a mid-year review of how the Treasury management activity is going, as well as an annual report. This report is kind of very detailed, and it's a complex report because it does outline some important policies about how we manage, £300 million of investments and also £300 million of borrowing. Given that the complexity, we did a bespoke training session for members of this committee, many of which people attended, on the 15th of January, that went through the detail of this report, because I understand that it is a complex report. So thanks, Chair, for your comments about the report being clear, and hopefully this was assisted by the training that many of you received on the 15th of January. So I'll take it as read and won't go through any report in detail, but obviously happy to answer any questions that weren't answered at your training session a week ago. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, comments and questions. Sometimes I have difficulty with acronyms, and I can sometimes work them out. Just remind me what LOBO loans are, please.
It's
Did you want me to take that one?
Kathy, take that, yeah.
Yeah, so it stands for lender option, borrower option. And so basically it's a borrowing instrument whereby the financial institution that we've borrowed from can vary the rate at fixed points during the life of the loan. And on those fixed points, they have to tell us that they intend to change the rate, at which point we can repay in full.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And MMFs, I've worked out, are money market funds, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so money market funds are short-dated instruments. There's sort of instant access to cash, although the money is invested across a range of instruments. But on a daily basis, we can call back the full amount of that fund. So we use them as a substitute for call accounts, because there aren't that many call accounts really out there that sort of pay as much as a money market fund does at the current time.
Right, thank you. Right, questions, Andy?
Ray has a question.
You've got Ray, yes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions, actually. First one is page 79. At the top, the Council's approach to responsible investment. I think it's fair to say responsible investments means many things to many people. In this case, I think you're referring to fossil fuel investments. I'm just wondering, when we make deposits with banks, for example, Barclays or HSBC, whether we take into consideration under this policy their support for fossil fuel companies active in fossil fuel business, mining companies and so on. Do we do that or not? The other thing is the investment which we have in Funding Circle. That was made some little while ago. This is further down the page, service investment loans. And I think we made that investment because to encourage Funding Circle to invest in growing companies in the county. And I wonder if you could comment upon the. I see we're withdrawing from that. Whether we, on the whole, it has worked out for us that we did actually encourage some meaningful investments in Gloucestershire as a result of that investment we made. So there's two things, please, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
They're quite detailed ones. Do you want to take those, Kathy, and I can add to anything at the end?
Yeah, no problem. So the responsible investment. So this was in response to the motion that was passed, and it concerned more our strategic funds. So we made a commitment that we wouldn't invest in any more strategic funds that were invested in sort of fossil fuel. So it's not really to do with our general day-to-day treasury investment. So if we were to invest with HSBC or Barclays, we wouldn't look to see what they do on in terms of fossil fuel investments. That is sort of outside of a treasury management brief, and that is the advice of our advisors as well, because the problem is if we take it too extensive, it would rule out pretty much investing in anything. So the aim of treasury is to try and make a return for the council. So we haven't looked at the motion in those sort of from that sort of point of view. We've just looked at it from a strategic fund point of view. And then on the Funding Circle, we're slowly disinvesting from the Funding Circle platform. I've probably got about £40,000 left in there because it's quite difficult at the moment to get the money out. But in terms of return, it's offered a good return, probably about 4%. And in terms of the support to Gloucestershire businesses, I can't quite remember the figure off the top of my head, but certainly the whole amount was given out to Gloucestershire businesses and recycled over the past few years that we've had the money in there, and has supported Gloucestershire businesses. So I think, yes, it has been a success. As the money comes back, we are exploring other options as to what to do with it in terms of an alternative sort of funding platform.
Catherine?
Thank you.
Just to add to that, Chair, so when we invest in the banks or put money with the banks, we look at the credit rating of the banks rather than their ongoing activities. So it's very much based on the credit rating of the banks in question that limit our choice rather than their who they then lend the money on to.
We talk about these investments, though, Paul. When we talk about a strategic event, can you give me an example of the sort of thing we might consider and turn down, if I can put it that way? I can't quite understand what investment might come our way that we would turn down. I mean, obviously, if we're asked to invest in a coal mine, that's something which we would come under this. Is that the sort of thing you've got in mind?
We have some multi asset funds that we can invest money in, and some property funds. So we ensure that those, when we have those surplus funds to invest, we wouldn't invest it in a fossil fuel sort of related investment. So we have the property fund and a multi-asset fund which we invest in, but we ensure that that we're not investing directly in fossil fuels.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments, please, to Paul or his colleague, Catherine? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. That sounds as a really useful and helpful document, which we can refer to, I think. And we've got questions to ask about Treasury and investment strategy. Right. Are you ready, Stephanie, for the next item, number 7?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. And good morning, committee.
Good morning.
So item 7 in front of you is the second progress report from internal audit for 2021, and it's the first progress report to reflect the approved revised internal audit plan for 2021 as approved by committee back in October 20. The report follows the process embedded by our previous chief internal auditor and confirms to committee the concluded activities from October through to December, so a 3-month period, update from our counter fraud team on a breadth of activity, and also those additional and new activities that ARA have progressed due to the risks from and impact from COVID. Not mentioned within the report, but what I'd like to reflect to committee is that wider input that the service has had into the wider COVID-19 effort with our partners. For example, team member participation in the food parcels within Gloucester, the recent COVID mass testing pilot. So there's lots of activity going on based on the original plan, revised plan, and still new activities coming through. Due to the period covered, this report may seem heavy, as we've had 16 summary paragraphs coming through regards concluded assurance outcomes and also that wider counter fraud update. For me, this reflects a significant level of activity completed by the ARA team while working remotely. But what it also reflects is the great support that we've had from the wider council, because that's required and needed to ensure that audit activity is supported remotely and delivered. So thank you to our wider colleagues within the council. Areas of note within this report, there's quite a lot in there, so I'll be very high level with this. So we have one limited assurance outcome coming through, and that's in relation to direct payments, children's. We have one split limited assurance outcome and control, and that's relevant to client affairs, adults. Now, split assurance is not something you will normally see coming through to committee. It's only used in a number of areas where we don't want to apply a limited assurance level on a whole piece of work. What we do is use split assurance to specifically identify the area of concern as limited, and then applying a different assurance level to the wider areas. The progress report also has 2 position statements regards new audit deferrals coming through, and all other assurance outcomes within the report are either satisfactory, substantial assurance, or it's assurance relevant to grant claims review or certification. Other than that, the only additional comment to make is that the next progress report to committee will be coming through at the next meeting, and we're already seeing a high number of concluded activities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephanie. If we could just have a word about direct payments. It seems to be a very fraught and difficult area. I think it's cropped up before as an area of concern. There are numerous references, I think, in the report to CSF, Care Services Finance, finding it difficult to get responses from the Disabled Children and Young People's Service. I recollect a case locally that I had to deal with briefly about somebody who was caring for a disabled youngster, they were really getting very anxious about delays in the payments, which are normally made on a monthly basis because of some really trivial hold-up. I suppose people in both those organisations or bits of the organisation realise the urgency of responding to each other's requests because of the impact on people who are expecting payment. Would you like to comment?
Yes, please, Chair. Just to say that you pick up on your first comment, you're right, the direct payments has come through to committee report before. Last year, direct payments is a very large area and it's relevant to children's and adult services. So committee will have seen those themes come through last year with an adults regards the new direct payments cards activity coming through, and also on adults. Specific to your query about recognition within the service, and while I can't comment on the specific case you have raised, what I can say is that the specific audit was requested by the service to review the area and identify improvement areas for control progression, and all audit findings have been positively responded to. So what I would suggest is, where there are any further direct queries on progression, and in line with the report decision, an officer will be requested to attend the next committee meeting and can answer specific queries as raised by committee.
I don't wish to raise this as a specific case because it's been dealt with, but it was an illustration really of how delays can materially and indeed emotionally upset people who are expecting payments if there isn't a swift resolution of issues. I think Andy Dempsey has raised his hand. Andy, before you speak, could you just say, you're from Children's Services, just say what your role is, please, for the benefit following Sean Parsons' earlier comment within the service.
Yeah, forgive me, Chair. My role's Director of Partnerships and Strategy, and I also deputise for the DCS on Mondays. So apologies for not introducing myself earlier.
That's fine.
Picking up on Stephanie's comments, we do take this seriously, and the concerns highlighted through the audit and governance process reflect concerns we've had about practice in the DCYPS service, and that has led to a change recently in management and also a specific service improvement plan, because some of the issues that audit and governance are highlighting relate to the quality of practice, the timeliness of response, the quality of assessment. So the two things are inextricably linked, Chair. And as is noted in Stephanie's report, we have responded positively, and I want to assure members that we are taking it seriously. It's one of those services also highlighted by Ofsted as an area where we need to improve practice, and I think we're now on with that improvement journey, and I expect matters to improve as they are doing over the coming months and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Good. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Will has got his hand up. Please, Will. And then Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Mine is rather specific. On page 119, I think it's 123 on our thing about service area grant certification. It's not one that I want an answer to because there isn't one, but the disabled facilities grant, we get about 6 million a year. We've spent all bar 500,000 of it, but with past year's monies, we've got 3.5 million to carry forward. And my concern here is that we ought to push to spend it because it creates savings in the future for keeping people in their homes. And I just wonder if that could be flagged up, or it is a concern that we're not spending the money to create savings in the future.
I think that's probably a question for Steve, isn't it? As to what happens to that money that's carried forward.
So in terms of if there's a specific reserve set up for from an underspend, we sometimes see that carried forward. Generally, in terms of the financial picture, both underspends and overspends are all tackled at the close down period. We don't carry overspends forward. We deal with that situation in the year. So we will be sometimes sympathetic to the position on underspends, but it tends to depend on the overall position of the directorate. And as you're probably aware, children's social care is considerably overspent. Adults, for example, might want to carry a little bit forward to deal with a specific issue, as we have done over a number of years. So if they can see that there's a liability coming down the tracks and they need to save that money for that specific liability, we may well consider that and allow them to do that at the outturn process, normally in around June time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. I thought you might offer that response. Ray, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, mine's a more general question. I know we do an age analysis of our debtor portfolio, and I know that there is usually a long tail in the sum of debtors debts overdue, which is often usually attributable to or often attributable to the adult care side, where we try to collect money from, I think, usually the relatives who've promised to pay but don't. Have we? And this could be quite a lot of money, but it's. I think it's all written. It's written off over 2 years if they haven't paid. I think it's. I think there's a protocol about that. Is this being covered in this in this particular internal audit activity progress? I know I couldn't find it in the sheet behind. Is that something we're looking at in audit, internal audit?
Stephanie?
Thank you for the query. So within the audit plan, we do have a wide variety of adults service reviews that are ongoing at the moment. However, I'm just going through them now. So they're defined in the back of your pack within the spreadsheet. So from pages
see them there.
133 onwards. And the adult specific reviews are detailed from page 134 onwards. So at the moment, within the adults ranges, we do have areas where we would touch on those themes, and client affairs will have been one of the areas where we touched on those themes. But your point is valid, and what we can do is take that point forward in regard to a specified review within our 21-22 plan. It's good to get this level of member feedback, and if there are any areas of specific risk, whether it be in a service in general or coming down to that point, we can certainly look at that and take them forward. So thank you for your feedback.
Thank you very much. I think that either Steve or Paul will be able to help, because I think that report on debtor and the aged debtors did actually emanate from finance originally, but I might be wrong. It's some time since I looked at it.
Yeah, and we do meet regularly with the portfolio holder to go through the aged debtor analysis and write some accounts off where appropriate or no longer collectible. And you're right, Ray, there is we set aside a provision in the accounts every year to be able to cope with some of that. So although in some circumstances we might have enough to cover the provision in the accounts, we will still keep collecting if there's a small amount of money dribbling through. I think one of the things that we've recognised generally on debtors is getting the bill issued quickly and chased quickly is absolutely key. And I'm speaking to the converted hopefully, but that's most of the administrative activity that we tend to concentrate on. So can we get the bill issued, and can we get people starting to make regular payments quickly as quickly as possible? That's the key of it. But I think working with audit, we can make sure that review is done and give the committee a view.
I think if it could be added to the work programme, Chairman, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Ray. The point's noted. Are there any other comments or questions for Stephanie on this particular item? If not, then we can move on to the annual governance statement, the improvement plan, updated from 2019 to 20. Gosh, we're almost in the year 2021 to 22, and we're still looking at these historical issues. Never mind. Stephanie, go ahead. Of course, one of them is the GFRS, which we've got under 9, so we don't want to duplicate that. You can either take that now in conjunction with number 8, and we can ask questions about that, or leave it subsequently. I don't mind. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be brief and also welcome your views. So the report you have in front of you is directly relevant to the 1920 AGS, as the Chair referred to. That document included 5 governance actions. The report that you have in front of you was facilitated by ARA and includes the up-to-date position on each action as provided by the specific lead officer and or their nominated representative. Final update against these actions will be agreed and confirmed by the 2021 annual governance statement report, which is due to be facilitated by the Head of Planning, Performance and Improvement and presented through to committee in July. Now, where we are, what we have in front of you, while the report is in line with prior practice, one item the Audit and Governance Committee has requested is that relevant action owners and all their nominated representatives would be invited to attend today's meeting to provide updates and respond to member queries on each of the identified actions. Now, Chair, I'd welcome your views if you're happy for me to hand over to the nominated officer on action 1 and go forward per action, or if you would prefer it to be led by member queries.
No, go ahead, Stephanie. I think that's the right order. I think we have people assembled. Thank you for that, Andy. Let's proceed. Let's ask them to make a statement, and then if there are any questions, we can deal with those afterwards. So,
thank you.
I think it's me, Chair, first, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think financial sustainability and the future financial sustainability is quite well known. We do regular monitoring reports to Cabinet. Clearly, we've got the budget monitoring, the budget report doing its cycle at the moment, and that goes to Cabinet on the 27th. I think when we did the governance statement for 1920, we probably couldn't have predicted the difficulties that we would have had throughout this financial year. I have to say, if I'd have been sat here in May 2020 giving you a view, I probably would have been a bit more worried about the growing costs and where all that income was going to be met from. I think I've been very pleased with the robustness of the monitoring and also the response to issues that finance directors for local authorities across the country have been raising. I think there's always examples in every place where there could be more resource, but I think from the County Council's perspective, we've been well listened to on issues that we have. I think the only understandable issue for us is that we still only have a 1-year financial settlement, and that obviously makes ongoing budgeting quite challenging. But I think the issues that we've got in our financial sustainability are well documented, particularly the high needs block on the dedicated schools grant. And again, we are not the only authority. In fact, there are many authorities in a much worse position than us in terms of the high needs block, which is if you like, the overspend that's been going forward. So happy to take questions, Chair, if there are any on that update.
Thank you, Steve.
Sorry, Nigel. Ray has a question.
Yes, Ray.
Thank you, Nigel. The reserves, Steve, of 18 million, the general reserves, 18.8 million, they've been around that level for some time. Meanwhile, our budget has increased, I think, to something like 480 million this year, isn't it? Something in that region, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Is 18 million still a good cushion to have, or are we? Would we have liked to prefer to have seen it higher, or where does it stand? Because I think there's a government guideline, isn't there? There's a SIPFA guideline about the level of reserves which are recommended.
Well, I think that guideline that you're referring to, the percentage, is an old guideline. It's out of date. Yeah. It's many years old now. I think it's kind of pre-2010 stuff.
More about me than them, I suppose.
Yes. The more accepted approach, and we've done this in the budget process for this year, is we do a risk assessment of the likelihood of needing to spend some of those reserves, and we've done that in the budget process for this year round. I mean, it's always useful to have more reserves. The balance is how much effort do you put into growing those, rather than the need to spend them on things, and that is a balance. You know, we could target more savings and ask for 10 million more savings in our budget and put that money into reserve, but then that causes difficulty and pain in services. And I think, for me, those reserves are adequate for the current time. I think if we weren't getting the money through from government, I'd be worried and want larger reserves. if we had much more sizable savings plans for the next 2 or 3 years, I'd want more reserves. But where we are at the moment, I think that's the right kind of pitch. And there is a full assessment in the budget report that's going forward this time. I'm sure Paul might want to add something.
Yeah, I remember you saying this at one of the budget meetings, that the old ratio has been abandoned. It's more based, the level of general reserve should be more based on a proper risk assessment.
Chair, that's all I was going to add, was in the MTFS papers that went to Cabinet before Christmas in the draft budget, that I think it's Annex 5, I think, there was a full breakdown of that risk assessment and what we've taken into account. And when we did that risk assessment, it came up at about our need for reserves, about 17.5 million. So arguably, we've got just above that level currently. So the full details of that kind of risk assessment are included in the draft budget that went to Cabinet before Christmas.
Yes. So an administration could decide to spend in an area of significant need part of your general reserves. Yes. Are there any questions or comments? Sean, yes.
Said, the Budget Scrutiny Committee, which took place earlier this month, we did spend some time looking at that, and indeed the response which we got there was exactly the same response as we're getting here. So it's been looked at quite closely. There's now on more than one occasion.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying it is subjective. You know, it's an art more than a science. You know, and some of those comments in there, you could say, well, why not 1.4 versus 1 million that we set aside in those figures? And that's the balance, isn't it? That is the balance in terms of, I think at the moment, what I'm saying is I wouldn't target additional activity to increase those reserves. Whilst I also wouldn't be saying go away and spend them willy-nilly, because actually we are still in the middle of a pandemic and we could still have some additional cost hit as one-offs. But I'm comfortable that they're at the right level.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the second point, children's services? Can we do that?
Chair, I think that's me, if that's helpful.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. I think pages 145 and 146 of members' papers probably give the clearest summary of where we are, both in relation to the fundamental position in terms of our performance, and also as it relates to the work of audit and governance, what we've done to link our improvement work to a more rigorous control regime. As it says there, we were expecting to be inspected, full inspection in the spring of this year, but COVID has changed that. But we were subject to what's called a focus visit. And it's worth distinguishing for members, that was more than the monitoring visits. The monitoring visits, of which we had 8, were 2 inspectors on site for 2.5 days or thereabouts, and fed through a process called Annex A, where we provided our data and performance and management information. This inspection was a team of 5 Her Majesty's inspectors, one of which was a school's HMI, and it was much more akin to an inspection. And on page 145, you'll see the link to the published letter and some key headlines. Ofsted did conclude that our response to COVID has been really positive and proactive. We've continued to see the majority of children and families face-to-face throughout, and also maintained very high levels of staff attendance and availability. The proportion, whilst the quality of our work has remained variable over the COVID period and over the last 12 months, our performance in some really key areas, the timeliness of visiting following initial assessment, the visiting to children on plans, the timeliness of our assessments have all improved markedly. So as Ofsted have concluded there, whilst the quality of practice is still variable, much more of it is now purposeful, rigorous and child-focused. Also, the proportion of casework that we find to be inadequate due to through auditing is reduced significantly. And what happens in an inspection? Ofsted review our audits to test the accuracy of our judgments, and they found them to be accurate and exhaustive. So the fact that we're seeing a reduction in inadequate work through audit is being reflected in what Ofsted is saying about the rigour and accuracy of that process. With respect to the control regime on 146, there's a brief summary there, Chair, of some of the things we try to do to enhance the programme around key issues like permanence, the management of our response to COVID on a day-to-day basis, and increasing the range of data sets that are reporting through our case management system. So on the whole, Chair, bringing that together, I think we are further on in our improvement journey, and that's pleasing, although we are not complacent. We know there's areas of practice that need to improve, and we're also continuing to enhance our control environment and link that to our improvements activity. So improvement and a more rigorous governance and control regime are sort of inextricably linked in our work. I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I just want to link up this point with the fifth point on the annual government statement. I'm not sure you mentioned in your report difficulties of recruitment, but that certainly was an issue, I think, in terms of children's social workers. Has that been eased in any way? And is the quality that is variable, is that not susceptible to training, or is it really about just not getting the right people? Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. They're two really good questions, actually. I'll deal with the second one first. The variability in quality is being addressed directly. What we do through our audit work is identify those teams that are and individuals who are underperforming. They are then subject to improvement support and challenge. And what you will see in our monthly QA performance report, Chair, is that the number of teams delivering inadequate work is reducing markedly. So we can track the fact that our inadequate work tends to be in those teams that have perhaps had more change and not availed themselves of our training programs. So that's the first point. So we've got a very direct link between our QA activity and targeting those individuals and teams who are underperforming, and that is starting to impact positively. On the recruitment one, I meant to mention this when we came onto that item later, Chair. Our position has shown a continued trajectory of improvement. The proportion of our agency workers is continuing to reduce. Our vacancies and turnover are all continuing to improve. And by the time we get onto that item, I can probably find in my emails the latest data from HR. So it's a continued improvement picture. One thing I would say is that COVID is having an impact. Less on staff availability, although that's a challenge because people are not wanting to move at the moment. The main impact from COVID is the accessibility of placements for children in care. That's a real issue, and that's a national problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Well, in respect of the next item, we have the Cabinet Member, Dave Norman. Welcome, Dave. And also our Chief Fire Officer, Wayne Bocock. So very pleased to see you here. I think we've got the report in front of us, so we should have it. So who's going to lead off? Is it you, Dave?
No, I think it should be the Chief Fire Officer as it's in his name. And obviously I'm happy to respond to any questions either after or before him if it's appropriate, but I'll let Wayne lead on the document itself.
Yeah, welcome, Wayne. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome everybody. Just to be clear, do you want me to go through the annual governance statement at this stage?
Well, you could just highlight. Why don't you just highlight problems you're still facing and those things that you think in the last 2 or 3 months you've managed to achieve?
Okay, yes, thanks, Chair. So members will have seen the report then, and I'll just draw attention to some of the key points.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing in there is that obviously we reference an inspection that was done by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service. I wasn't in a position to put any detail about that into the report because we only received the findings yesterday and they were under embargo for release until today. But but I'm very pleased to say that we have received a very favourable letter from HMIC FRS about the way that fire and rescue staff and well, it's about fire and rescue, but I'll talk now about community safety as well, staff and trading standards, civil protection and the coroner's service, about how well they've responded to COVID. So HMIC FRS have inspected all 45 fire and rescue services in England. They've released a press statement today and a cover letter about the whole fire sector, and within that, Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service receives very favourable feedback about the range, breadth of activity to support the response to COVID. But importantly, part of their inspection reviews how our business continuity plans and how we ensured that we could deliver our statutory duties to respond to fires and other emergencies, whilst at the same time supporting, the wider partnership and public sector and emergency services response to the COVID pandemic. And again, very pleased to say that they've recognised how well we maintained our availability, maintained fire appliances, created COVID secure workplaces, maintained staff availability, supported the welfare of staff. And again, that was done right across GCC. So, we pulled down the support and maintained the alignment with the rest of the county council to make sure we could provide support to staff through that process. And again, some notable comments for the work that staff have been doing beyond really a national agreement that was in place as well between the National Fire Chiefs Council, the Fire Brigades Union and the national employers, what they call the MJC, part of the Local Government Association. And again, staff have volunteered to go above and beyond some of the work that was negotiated nationally. And we continue to do so. So since the report was done, we're now engaged in supporting vaccination centres, testing centres, and we've extended a mutual aid request from South West Ambulance Service Trust to continue to provide staff now until into April, but also to provide more staff than we were to crew additional ambulances to support the pressures that the ambulance service are under. So again, pleased to say that we've got, over 20 staff involved in providing emergency medical response by being part of an ambulance crew with the ambulance service. So a bit of an update really, and more detail than what was in the report. Now I'm able to release that. And again, really proud and pleased with what's going on there. I think in terms of some of the improvement work within fire and rescue, particularly following the original audit reports and investigation into fire and rescue service, we did a restructure some 12 months ago. We've now reviewed that restructure. That's resulted in some changes. Some of the pressures that's creating are, at the minute, we're looking at a relatively, in terms of GCC, relatively small overspend in the budget, probably a larger overspend than we're used to within GFRS, but we're working with strategic finance on that, and we're looking at reviewing either how we can draw in the capacity that we need to support the improvement journey, or where we can turn that overspend back around and make sure we try and come in closer to budget at the end of the year. We are in a position where hopefully in February I'll be presenting the larger improvement plan to CLT about the journey, and I thank both Chris Spencer and Andy Dempsey on this call for their support. We're trying to take lessons from the accelerated improvement planning approach and the journey that children's services have been on, bring some of that learning into fire where it can be applied and where it's relevant, to make sure that we can now move on from the audit findings as we come towards the end of closing down some of those actions, which you'll see later on in the report. And we focus more on the broader fire and rescue service improvement and HMICFRS findings, which were around improvements required in business fire safety and also cultural improvements within the fire and rescue service. We've spent quite some time, which unfortunately has been delayed due to the response to COVID, and the work that's involved, but we've spent quite some time developing a very comprehensive approach to improvement that goes beyond the audit reports. And that's what we'll be presenting to CLT, and at some point I'm sure it will certainly go to Scrutiny Committee, and at some point we'll probably end up being updated to Audit and Governance Committee in the future. And I think at that point, Chair, I'll pause and take questions on the remainder of the information that is contained within the statement.
Thanks very much, Wayne. Yeah, it would be nice if you've got that now disembargoed report, if you can give us a flavour at some point. I like your phrase beyond audit. I mean, I wondered how 118 recommendations was going to weigh heavily on your shoulders. But from what you're saying, it isn't weighing too heavily. It seems to be very much in line with what you expect of the service. Is that true?
I think I've driven quite hard and been rather over-ambitious in terms of the timescales to address those 118 audit recommendations. Have to say a huge thank you to all of the staff who have tirelessly, and even through COVID, I wouldn't let up. I said the one thing that we will not stop doing whilst we have to divert capacity to respond to COVID is focus on the improvement work required. So staff have been phenomenal. Have to thank Audit and Steph and the team. They've been very supportive, and members, other colleagues on this call who make up the improvement board, who again have continued. But we were hoping to be able to close most of them down by this Audit and Governance Committee. Originally, we said 18 months to 2 years. I then stretched that and put more pressure on people to try and get it closed for this meeting. I have to say we haven't quite got there, but we are getting very close, and we will be in a position to close them down by the end of the financial year, I hope. But I think we've done a phenomenal job. I've had to communicate with staff. So one of the issues, and it's been a learning point for me, if I'm honest, Chair, a lot of staff were quite concerned about why we were so doggedly focused on the audit recommendations, and there was quite clearly a lack of understanding about the governance arrangements and why those audit recommendations and the response to them is so important. So what it's caused us to do is revisit that, communicate with staff and explain to them the importance of the audit process. So what we've had to do is, effectively, as I've described it, this has been a huge block of work we've needed to do, but we needed to clear the work to create space to focus on a broader improvement journey, because it was taking up capacity. So it was important that we focus rapidly and very diligently to make sure we close the recommendations down, which I'm pleased to say we've got to a good position.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of know how you feel. Once upon a time, I chaired the audit committee of the Connections Board, the privatised career service, and following a Government Office of the South West inspection, we had 186 audit recommendations we had to work through. That wasn't much fun, but fortunately we had a very good director of finance who just got her head down and did it eventually. You need to explain to staff, I'm sure you do, that they've just got to be followed through, and hopefully you'll come out the other side within a decent timescale. Do you want to add anything, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to back up a couple of the statements that the Chief made in there, and it's directly to the staff. When you look at the fact that the Improvement Board is made up mostly of senior and principal officers, and the fact that the Chief said he's been keeping pressure on staff to bring those papers forward to allow us to get to the stage. And I clearly want to recognise the fact that it's people at middle management level and below who've gone above and beyond, who've worked incredibly hard with COVID going on as well. And they have actually delivered the standard of work that we wanted. We've got papers that are clear and have taken us forward. And I found it enlightening being a member of that Improvement Board, and recognise that we do have some very, very intelligent and forward-looking middle-ranking firefighters that can only be good for this service moving forward. So I would like it minuted as the lead cabinet member that I am really, really proud of all that they've done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, I see Sean has his hand up. Go ahead, Sean, please.
I know that when, in fact, Dave will always reflect it. I've always asked about the culture, and thank you, Wayne, for touching on it. But what it does seem to me, the fantastic performance by the Fire and Rescue Service is a reflection on really a very positive culture down there. I really just want to say that. I mean, there may be further development with the culture, but it seems to me that compared to some comments we were seeing and hearing a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, there seems to be some really positive moves, and it's very welcoming to see that. I hope I'm correct in my assessment, by the way, but that's certainly what comes across to me. And on behalf of everybody, I think I'd like to say publicly, thank you for all the work which they've done, especially this year, well, since the end of the last year, in all the flooding and everything else which we've seen.
Thank you, Sean. Well, there's only the matter of the budget overspend, but you'll no doubt explain that to Steve and his colleagues later. That's not for us, really. Thanks ever so much for joining us for that update. Well done to both of you, and we'll no doubt see you again, hopefully to wrap up this progress journey. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
The next item under AGS is how to fill recruitment. I made an error and thought it was the last element. It isn't. It's the fourth. And I don't know who's going to deal with that, really.
Chair, I'm happy to. I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory is the item. As you can see, we've tried to tackle those areas that have specific issues and with some success. And sometimes those issues are local issues and sometimes they're national. I can see Colin's on the line, so if Colin, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Just a couple of things, if I may, Steve. Thank you. And for colleagues who don't know me, I'm Colin Parkin, Head of Human Resources. It is worth kind of reconfirming that the staffing difficulties that we are experiencing as a county council certainly aren't unique to us. Colleagues in other shire authorities and metropolitan authorities nationally are finding difficulties in recruiting in certain highly skilled, qualified shortage areas in the labour market. We've made considerable strides in staying at least within shouting distance of pay rates in the public sector to keep pace with that, and that has been important. But perhaps more importantly, we've invested quite considerably in longer term solutions in terms of growing our own through the use of traineeships and apprenticeships. It's in the nature of that kind of initiative, though, that the results show gradually over time and not immediately. So we do expect our development programs to deliver us qualified staff over a period of time. We've made good strides, particularly I have to say in children's services, in reducing the turnover of skilled and qualified staff. That has come down over the last few years. I think it also is important, though, to be honest with members and say that though we have introduced across services a wide range of responses to address recruitment issues for highly specialised staff, this issue is not going to go away quickly. It will be with us for 2021 and I'm afraid into 2022. And I suspect that my colleagues in other HR services across the county, across the country, will be making, will be offering the same advice to members elsewhere. We are, I think, making real progress in addressing recruitment and retention, but there are still very considerable hotspots in some service areas. So a kind of mixed report for members there, Chair. Some good news, but still an issue.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Do colleagues wish to pose any questions of Colin? It's good to see you. Bernie, yes. Councillor
Just to comment on children's services, I sit on that group. I think everybody anticipates there will be a heavier burden on children's services due to COVID and what COVID's done to our economy, and that will put pressure on more families. Are we trying to get ahead of the curve by getting things in position in anticipation of this surge, which I'm sure is building now? And I've talked with Chris and people like that on casework, which a few years ago would never have occurred. But it is COVID related. There are problems with schoolings and things like that. So obviously there's going to be an increase on the pressure. Are we looking to make it even more robust? I don't know where we are as regards Ofsted and things like that. It's going to put us in a very hard place. I just wonder what your thoughts on that were.
Could I suggest Andy's in the conversation? He's got his hand raised, Chair. Maybe Andy can come in on that one.
Yes, please. I'm happy. Please, Andy.
Councillor Fisher raises a very good question, and as he's indicated, Chair, we have done some contingency planning and we've modelled what we're calling that latent demand, what that might look like, using work that Essex did. We've not seen it emerge so far, as Councillor Fisher's indicated, but we've got some robust contingency plans, and we also track this week by week, day by day in the MASH to see whether we're seeing those increases. Where we are seeing it in the system, you will appreciate we've seen a steady and sustained growth in the numbers of children in our care and the numbers of children open to child protection plans. But I think Councillor Fisher is right to raise the potential for families who may have been just about managing before to fall into our gaze, particularly in the early help arena. And that's something we're planning for, but it's not emerged yet. But we are thinking about that actively and monitoring it very closely.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back, Bernie, or is that a sufficient response?
Not really. I'm glad it's recognised, and I'm glad we're putting some contingency in, because I'm much more certain about that than the whole time we're picking a Gold Cup winning. I know it's coming.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, I don't think so. So thank you very much. Good to see you, colleague. Oh, sorry, Anne.
Councillor Parsons has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Sorry, I don't have a list in front of me, I'm afraid. I'm dependent on you. Occasionally I see a hand. Go ahead, Sean, please.
No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't now. You've been let off lightly, Colin, but we do understand, I think, the overall recruitment difficulties. We do have budgets to consider. You can't always just add incentives to pay scales. It's not easy, particularly in the public sector, and you've got comparabilities to look at all the time and scales, but press on. It is as you say, it's a continuing problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Well, Stephanie, we're on to the final aspect. Is there anything to say, and is anybody going to say anything about the COVID impact on governance?
Rob Ayliff is down for that one, Chair. Thank you.
Rob, yes, this is particularly high level, so it's appropriate for you, Rob. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And for the benefit of those that may not know me, I'm Rob Ayliff, Director of Policy, Performance and Governance. I think I'd summarise the impacts of COVID into 4 areas. The first is the management of and leadership of the emergency response itself. And in the report that I've attempted to summarise the arrangements that we've put in place for the management of that, but they involve very, very regular meetings at all levels of the council to ensure that that we're responding to the latest situation. And as a result, I think our response has been particularly agile over the last year. The second area for me would be the management of business continuity while we're in the emergency situation. And again, those same structures are being used to look on a week-by-week basis at the status of all our key service areas, identify any pressures that are emerging, identifying how the changes in legislation might impact on our ability, legislation and guidance might impact on our ability to provide those services, and in particular, at those times where we were moving between tiers, to quickly respond to the changes in terms of what that meant for services and communicate those out to the general public. The third area I think I'd highlight as a major impact is the impact of remote working on our decision making as a council, and this meeting is an example of how we responded to that and put those arrangements in place. I know that in the early days of the pandemic, there were lots of questions about how we were managing to maintain decision making and how we'd make sure that decision making remained transparent during those early days before remote working was a possibility. Now, you will know that the Council Constitution allows for delegated decision making by officers. So in the early days, there were one or two examples where we had to rely on that because of the urgency of the decisions that were needed. But in all those cases, the correct urgency procedures were followed. Those decisions were subsequently published and publicised on the Council's website. So I'm confident that we've maintained our usual standards, both in terms of taking the decision, but also in terms of making sure that transparency requirements were met. And then the fourth area I'd highlight is the impact of remote working more generally and the new risks that introduced that had to be managed, particularly the risks for the workforce. And hopefully you can see from my report that, again, we've put additional controls and measures and approaches in place to make sure that we're appropriately managing those risks. So that would include things like the extra resources that Colin and his team have put into staff welfare and well-being, the extra work that occupational health are doing, the work that the safety and health and environment team have done to make sure that that staff are making appropriate use of DSE assessments, the work that property services and ICT have done to roll out additional kit and equipment to people who are working from home. And within my own area, we've updated information governance advice and rolled out that across the council workforce to make sure that the new risks that are being introduced as a result of remote working are effectively controlled and managed as well. So, you know, the report is short, but I think gives a real sense of the breadth of activity that's going on in this area. I'm very happy to take any questions that you've got about any of that.
Thank you. I've got Steve with his hand up. I will say that the £80,000 you spent on creating the Help Hub was well worth it. Steve.
Yes, yeah, and I guess I just wanted to emphasise that this isn't all negative. There are lots of positive work in throughout COVID, that we are making sure we capture and keep going forward. This is a prime example of that. You know, what will our remote working situation look like after COVID? What do we want to keep? And I think we'll probably be aiming at some sort of blended approach between some sort of face-to-face and some sort of remote working, so that people don't have to drive or whatever all over the country. And the same goes with staff. We've had very positive comments from some staff saying they appreciate the flexibility of working at home or working remotely. And again, we need to capture that, and we are trying to anticipate what the post-COVID office-like situation looks like and set up a few pilots to respond to that. And one last one, in terms of the closeness of working with our district colleagues and the community activities that have been going on. Rob and I have sat on, Rob continues to sit on the community resilience cell. So I think, and you know, the close working with voluntary and community sector groups and all that kind of stuff. So I think for me, we totally recognise what's happened from a governance perspective, but I think we also need to recognise what's happened from a positive perspective as well as the negatives, and be willing to challenge ourselves to try and capture some of those positives going forward.
Thank you. Bernie.
Thanks. Just to say that some of the things that I've experienced whilst we're in COVID situation have been very good, and I've had marvellous responses from many officers. The support of a local school of mine with growing a community fund application absolutely went through like a rocket, because they need it to supply young kids with home learning equipment like iPads and things like that. And it was great to be able to do that. But there's also the aspect, we've got to look on the mental health aspect of COVID. I think we don't know what it is, but it is not going to be good. I can guarantee that. I think it's going to put great pressure on people. And I think we've all been pretty exasperated and fed up with lockdowns and things like that, but we've had to follow them. But what the long-term implications and the long-term COVID implications for people, I know school teachers who are working now with long-term COVID and are working through the situation, and it is a concern, and nurses. So we're going to, mental health is going to be very much a loser to COVID.
Thank you, Benny. Ray, you were next in line.
Thank you, Chairman. As we've all got so goggle-eyed over Zoom and WebEx and the rest of it, I was quite surprised to read on page 157 that council committee meetings have been suspended until further notice. I think it doesn't apply to this meeting, but I just wonder what that is supposed to be getting at.
Can only be in meetings in person, can't it, really?
Yes, and sorry for any confusion. So the text from page 157, I think, is from the previous update. Sorry, I cut myself off there. That's from the previous update that was provided some months ago. It's the text from page 159 downwards, where it says position at December 2020. That's giving the current update. So I think what Councillor Theodolou is looking at is the historic picture, and possibly relates to a time when we weren't meeting in this way.
I think Quennington, as usual, is behind the curve. But what I would say is I've been amazed at the way DSU have actually managed to get documents out and posted and agendas done, and wonderful work done by people like Andrea, Andy, our clerk today, and I think it's been quite amazing. So I'm glad to see that the meetings weren't suspended and so on. So that's very good. I haven't missed anything.
Right.
Thanks, Rob.
No comments about Quennington. Alan Priest, Councillor Priest, which you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Ray, I would just like to add to your congratulations and thanks to the work of the registration service. As you know, we did a few citizenship ceremonies before Christmas and prior to the increase in lockdown. So I'd just like to add thanks to those people. Just two questions. Apologies if I missed them. Are we monitoring non-COVID related sickness levels around staff? And are we encouraging staff to make sure they take their annual leave entitlements?
I'll take those if that's okay. Oh, Colin's here. Colin can do that.
Well, Colin can do that, yes. Colin.
Yes, I'll come in on those two questions. We're very definitely encouraging staff to take their leave entitlement. We don't think it's at all healthy for people, even when working from home, not to have annual leave in the course of a year. We're putting a firm limit on the amount of annual leave that, with managers' approval, can be carried forward into the next year. And I have to say that, in common with most other local authorities, the effect of home working in particular has shown that has delivered a considerable decrease in sickness absence rates by something around 2 full-time equivalent days per employee per year. So our seasonal kind of trend curve is the same as every other year. You have more sickness in the winter and less in the summer. But the amount overall is very considerably down on last year.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Colin.
Thank you. Andrew. Councillor Gravels.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of comparison with previous pandemics, and people talked about how much better off we are in terms of communications during this pandemic. And I just want to pick up the points that Rob was making about virtual meetings. And I'd be really happy, Chair, if we could pass on a huge vote of thanks to our IT teams who have managed to keep all elected members involved with the democratic process, and also with our own communities. Certainly, as a councillor here in Gloucester, it's been really, really helpful, not just to keep in touch with the county council, but also the city council, but also equally important, my work as a councillor, with all the different various community groups. And we all know, as everyone knows, the Gloucestershire Hub, with the community volunteers working with the health service and people in our communities. And I think sometimes the IT people get overlooked. Not just their ability to introduce the IT systems right across Gloucestershire, but to bring those of us, and I declare an interest here, in who are not so IT savvy as perhaps we were before the pandemic started to hit. So I think the IT team, Rob, Chair, Committee, have done an excellent job, and I think it would be remiss of us not to recognise their work and to send a message to them on this meeting, recognising that. Thanks.
Thank you. It's worth a comment in the minutes, I think, Andy, please. Thank you very much for that. And the health authorities as well. I mean, I was vaccinated along with my wife and lots of other people in Cirencester yesterday. And the achievements in terms of the latest response in vaccination in Gloucestershire has been commented on in the national papers. Yeah. Okay, I think unless there was anybody who urgently needed a question, we ought to move on. But Andy.
Sorry, Nigel. John Payne's been patiently
Oh,
waiting.
I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry if I've overlooked you, but I don't actually have a list in front of me. Go ahead, John, please.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to reflect that, on the excellent work by all the staff at GCC, and particularly the IT team who've provided the infrastructure that's enabled home working. And it's provided a lifeline both to the council and to the employees. I just wondered, going forward, have you undertaken a lessons learned exercise on home working that might provide some guidance moving forward?
Good, yeah, good question.
So if I start this, and then Colin might want to come in and say a few words about what we've been doing with staff groups. I think we've done several lessons learned, as you might imagine, throughout the year at all levels, at gold, at silver. I think I really welcome those comments on IT, because what we often find is that we're concentrating on what we still want to do rather than what we've already delivered. And I think it's worth remembering, certainly back in the early days, I was quoting statistics like it felt like we'd moved like 3 years in 3 weeks. You know, that kind of distance to get all those homework in, to get all those people. And in some places, I've heard stories where authorities, you know, had to limit who could work. And they said one staff group could work in the morning and another staff group could work in the afternoon. We were able to go pretty much within about a couple of weeks to lots of people home working. I still want to go further. I think there are still advancements we want to do. We want to move heaven and earth in terms of our networks. Our Citrix needs getting rid of, I'd probably say, moving to things like 365 and Teams and all that kind of stuff. I think some staff have still find it difficult at home, and as do members in terms of their own setup. We are at the moment going through several upgrades in terms of new LAN and WAN setups, which I've talked about with the Overview Scrutiny Committee. I imagine probably by about the autumn, we'll have a much better option for home workers. It's kind of okay for many people at the moment, and some people that really find it difficult, we need to listen to why, because it's a multitude of factors. You know, it's not just the IT, it's their home setup, it's, as Rob was saying, their display screen equipment assessment and all that. And that's what we're trying to do as part of the modern working post-COVID. So if it doesn't work for you, tell us why, and let's listen to those questions and let's try and challenge some of those issues. Colin, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
Just to add very briefly to what you've said there, Steve, the county has formed an agile working officers group because I think it's true that home working has been a bit of a revelation for some of our managers, and it really has assisted in moving managers' mindset to concentrating on performance management in terms of impact and outcomes, and not about presenteeism. And we do think that there are colleagues, of course, particularly those that are homeschooling when schools aren't fully open for business, who currently are experiencing some significant difficulties, but thankfully that will be a short-term thing. And flexible and agile working, as long as output is achieved, I think is very much the future. And we're definitely, as an agile working group, going to be considering lessons learned to build it into our long-term employment offer.
Thank you, colleagues. There's certainly a silver lining there. We've spent a long time on this item. We've never done that before for the annual government statement, but I hope you feel it's been a useful and important scrutiny. We move on now. We've skipped over 9 because that was included really in 8, and she's very patient, but I think Jane's there, isn't she, Andy? Yeah. Jane, this is a new venture. Would you like to tell us how and why this arose, the annual schools assurance statements?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This came out of, I think, a committee meeting last year where there was some concern about whether we'd got a really robust process in place to follow up the school audits that are done. So I think in previous times, perhaps it was left to chance whether a governing board had actually followed through on the recommendations from an audit report. And that was dependent on the individual school and the relationship with the governing board or with the school business manager or the head. So we were asked last year to put in place a process for the gaining assurance from chairs of governors that they had acted upon the recommendations of within the audit reports. One of the issues in the past will have been timeliness. So boards were responding to the audit, but perhaps not in good time. And so in that delay, schools could get into quite a lot of financial difficulty if they hadn't attended to some actually quite minor recommendations. So during last year with Governor Services, I put in place a process that Governor Services would be involved in, because of course this is the responsibility of the governors and the chair of governors on behalf of the governing board. This is the report. You have the report, and it's the first one of its kind. So we'd be interested to know whether this is sufficient feedback for the committee, whether you'd want more information, whether this works, and then we would continue to produce such reports from July onwards. So the current process is outlined there for you in the report. Audit team conducts the report, conducts the audit, produces the report, sends it to Governor Services, who then contact the chair of governors and requests a statement of progress. So that happens fairly quickly. It gives enough time, I think, for a governing board to have acted on the recommendations, but not too much delay. And they are asked to then provide a report that comes through to the Director of Education, to Governor Services, who passes it on to the Director of Education. and that that report is pre-populated by Governor Services with the issue, the recommendation, and then for the governing board to complete the actions, the date, and an assessment of whether the action is completed or whether it's ongoing and a point at which it should be completed, and indeed whether there's any need for further support in making sure that the recommendation is acted upon and completed. So we've now applied that for, I think, 12 schools in the time frame expected, and our assessment is that, you know, broadly we have got a robust process in place. All schools responded, majority of actions had been completed. Where they haven't, then we've now got a process whereby we can feed that back into either school finance or to the deficit officers group if there is a particular issue. And because my advisors in school improvement are also aware of this process, then they are able to follow through if there is a problem for a head teacher or a chair of governors in acting on those recommendations. So you have, I think, in the school audit report, an overview of the sorts of recommendations that are made, and they're generally around the organisation of the finance committee, perhaps, in schools, the relationship between the finance committee of the governing board with the full governing board, the quality of and clarity of finance policies, the ability of governing board to plan and to monitor their budgets, and some are you know, fairly minor but important, that are related to school buses, petty cash, that kind of thing. So those sorts of processes. So they go from the sort of quite major, from whole school budget planning for 3 years to quite minor. But what this process means is that we are exercising our role in holding governors to account for their budget monitoring, their budget control in a really sort of timely way. It also means then that rather than just having the individual audit and the report, we pick up a more general picture of what's happening over a group of schools. So now we've got the findings and the response from 12 schools collected together. We can feed that back into governor training and back through to finance and to audit. So there's more of a follow through for the system in this.
Thank you, Jane. I think it's a very good start. I think in terms of the report, we'd want to discuss with internal audit, with Piyush and Stephanie, what would be a good format, but it's a very good start. I mean, the education field, I know from my experience, is littered with chairs of governors, of heads and principals who've had to resign because they just didn't pay any attention to the audit requirements or the Ofsted requirements. So it does put a new light for some chairs of governing body on the seriousness of their job, doesn't it?
Mm. Yes, it does. I mean, that they are highly accountable, and we know that increasingly schools are getting into difficulty, financial difficulty. So yeah, I think this is part of the process to be preemptive in a way in the challenge, and support for governing boards is really important.
Yes, and small primary schools must find it quite difficult to recruit people with a sufficient understanding, not just of finance, but also of things like audit and managing risk. I guess you're helping the schools under our control in that respect.
I mean, yes, this all applies to local authority, the maintained sector. But yes, and there isn't a pattern across the county. So you might have a small school in a rural area that's actually very fortunate in that they can find a governor who has that skill set. But in some schools, it's really, it's not easy to find somebody who is really conversant with that whole finance area. So it is tricky.
Colleagues, any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Theodolou.
Yes, just points of information, really. I don't know how many schools there would be under in the maintained category with which you're concerned. I think that's correct. Is that it's only the maintained sector?
It's only the maintained sector, yes.
I don't know how many there would be, but I think there's quite a lot. I'm just wondering how do you go about deciding which schools to visit? Are they the ones who are already in a bad way, or they're in deficit, or is it not quite so easy as that?
Yeah, the audit team ultimately make the decision, but we inform that decision, and we use the intelligence that we have in education, and that's fed through from all areas of education to decide where we would recommend there needs to be an audit taking place. So it might be that a school already looks as though it's got budget issues, but the support is already in there. Actually, if schools are already flagging up as having difficulties with their budget management, so it's more likely to come from it might come through from planning or from a general concern about the competence of a school. It might have come through from an Ofsted visit or a review that flags up that there might be some concern here, and we'd like audit to have a closer look at what's happening. So it might have come through from HR. There might be some staffing issues that start to indicate that there might be some wider difficulties.
Jane, we'll ask Stephanie. She's got the audit service view on this. Stephanie.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reinforce what Jane has just confirmed, so within the audit plan for 1920, that was when there was a shift in the approach on schools audits, requested and agreed by Audit and Governance Committee. So prior to that, only 2% of our plan was allocated to schools audits. And when it came through to 1920, that shifted to 7% of the county plan. And that's why you see this volume of schools audit work and audit outcome coming through into Jane's report and tying that off. That 7% has been maintained for the 2021 audit plan year. We've been successful with a remote pilot approach with schools, risk assessing like normal in regard to the areas of concern, exactly in line with the themes Jane raised, but also making sure that where we are completing audit that we can do that remotely and meet schools' requirements. What we have done, so after those 3 pilot audits this year, we're now working with the relevant directors, so Chief Internal Auditor and our Principal Auditor Lead are linking with the Director of Children's Services to reconfirm and roll out that remote approach. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, I think, colleagues, unless there are any other questions, we'd better move on to the limited assurance report. Thank you very much, Jane, for your contribution to the report.
Thank you, Chair.
And for your presence at the meeting. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we've got Philip and Joe Saville here. Philip Williams and Joe Saville on the disposal of assets, one of the limited assurance reports under item 11. If you could give us a brief introduction. We are trespassing on people's lunchtime, I know that, but we do want to hear from you. Who's going to start? Philip? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just really briefly, considerable work has been done on updating the Council's procedures and documentation in respect of particularly the vehicle disposals and ensuring that that information is available to the people who need to know. So what I've done is reviewed the progress a few weeks ago and provided updates on each area. I think it's really important to differentiate between a sort of something that's evolving and something that's static. And in this case, we will continue to evolve this our procedures to reflect best practice and take the advice of people who can help us to do that. So I'm satisfied that we have now got the right fit for purpose procedures in place. That information is available to the people who use it and need to know, and that we have actually been following the correct procedures. One thing that did slightly surprise me was, in fact, how few vehicles we have disposed of in the last year. Now, that's maybe not a great surprise because we've had COVID, but I, as part of this process, I did ask to have a look at files and asked about the number of vehicles, and so we were talking about, I think, 3 in total in the last 12 months. So it wasn't a large trawl, but I'm quite happy to take any questions, though, if you've got them. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Any questions from colleagues or comments? As you say, there's a limited amount of disposal at the moment. I guess the county is working its vehicles really rather hard. As long as it's safe, that's absolutely fine. But of course, it only needs one example of poor disposal, and I'm sure we can think of 1 or 2 examples like that to make a great issue out of it. But it is a question of getting everybody to follow the existing procedures, I guess.
Nobody else has their hand up, Nigel.
Yes,
Councillor. Just to say, I assume that leasing doesn't count as disposal. We're probably doing more leasing than we are purchase and sale now. So disposal of vehicles will become a lot less because come to the end of the lease agreement, renew it or not.
There are rules that we still have to follow, whether the vehicles are owned by us or leased by us. Making sure that the insurance cover that we have is maintained until they are no longer leased by us. Making sure that any sensitive equipment, or in the case of if they are emergency service vehicles, that they cannot. There's nothing on them or in them that we wouldn't want out there. And so there's. You make a good point, though. We have quite a blend of ownership and lease in at the moment, and we need to look at, and in fact our procedures cover both. Obviously, when we dispose of a vehicle that's not our own asset, then we are not making there's no capital receipt as such, but there may be a revenue cost of early, especially if that vehicle is disposed of before the end of the intended lease, or if the vehicles have damage. And what we want to do is make sure that, however, whatever type of vehicle it is, that we get the best value to the taxpayer.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that. Sorry, Joe, if your attendance has been largely superfluous, but thank you for coming in any case. Do I see Sean raising his hand?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. Perhaps,
I just wanted to
ask justify your existence by answering the question. Go on, Sean.
Yes. I wanted to ask a quick question. Sometimes at the end of leases, there's a clause which says sometimes at the end of leases, there's a clause which says the lessee can purchase it for a small sum. I don't know if we've got any leases like that, but is that checked? And indeed, if there is a clause like that, can I assume that in fact they have to be sold away from the county?
So I can answer that for you, Councillor. So well, we do have vehicles that obviously we lease and they come to the end of their term, and there's no longer an option to extend the lease. Where the vehicle is in very good condition and the service area would like to consider to purchase that vehicle, then we do engage and sometimes we have the option to buy and put it into our own fleet of vehicles. And that vehicle, we're in a situation at the moment, we're negotiating with this company about procuring those vehicles because they're coming to the end of their lease period and we can no longer extend. And then we will evaluate to see whether that is a good purchase for the authority. And if not, then that vehicle then will go back to the lease company. All logos, etc., are removed before it goes back, and that lease company then will sell that vehicle on.
So my point was slightly different from that. Are they allowed to be sold maybe to any member of staff?
No, no, sir. No, sir. So if it's a lease vehicle, then that if I don't know where that particular lease company would be selling it, but if we had a particular member of staff that was using that vehicle or knew of that vehicle and knew that the lease was coming to an end, then it would be that member of staff. We, as an authority, we would not involve ourselves with that. If the members of GCC staff wish to purchase an ex-GCC fleet vehicle that had been leased, then that it would be their responsibility to contact auction houses, etc., or ask where that vehicle was being sold. We, as the authority, would not get involved with selling lease vehicles to staff members or purchase vehicles. It is a staff member's responsibility. If they wanted to do that, they would have to do that outside of GCC.
Quite right. And I can't imagine that happens very often. I mean, I would never buy a leased vehicle that I'd been using afterwards. Are there any other questions or comments, please? Thank you for your attendance. I don't think there are. No. Thank you so much. All right. We move on. Do we have anybody from commissioning? Andy?
Chair, I'm picking this up on Wendy's behalf. I'll deal Yes, I'll deal with the first half around commissioned unregulated placements, and then my colleague Jill Horrobin will deal with the connected persons aspects. And again, conscious of time, Chair, I'll be brief.
Thank you.
Our response to the recommendations is recommendations are set out on 211 and 212, and the current position is on page 213 of the report, which sets out the December position. What I can say absolutely is that this was looked at in detail during the focused visit, and Ofsted found that our management oversight and risk management of commissioned unregulated placements is now robust, and they recognise that whilst this isn't our destination of choice for children, they will be appropriate in exceptional circumstances. So in summary, I think, as you can see from the report, the commissioning team has responded robustly to the recommendations, with a particular emphasis on management oversight and risk management, and ensuring ourselves that when we do use an unregulated commissioned placement, it is appropriate to do so and generally exceptional. And I think that's positively reflected through the focused visit in Ofsted's published letter, and the comments that Wendy's given me to communicate around risk management and management oversight being improved are drawn from Ofsted's published comments in the focus visit, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes. Do we have any questions? I guess, although the most recent report is encouraging and positive, it's an area that Audit ought to keep its eye on. Perhaps it ought to be placed on the regular list of audit activity because it is so important. And that doesn't mean that you're neglecting your responsibilities. You're clearly making improvements, but it's just a considerable risk area. Stephanie.
Thank you, Chair, and to fully support what you've just stated. So all management updates that are coming through this section, so there's 4 in total, committee, please expect them to come through the internal audit plan 21-22 proposals for follow-up audits. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, could I come back briefly on that?
You may.
I think you're absolutely right, Chair. It will continue to be a preoccupation of the Children's Service senior leadership, and it does relate to the comments and observations of a number of members about the impact of COVID. If we see pressures in the availability of placements, it necessarily results potentially in an increase in unregulated placements, particularly for older young people and complex young people, while we assess them more thoroughly. And it is something, you're right, it should be exceptional and should always be subject to a good degree of rigour. That's what Ofsted would want to see. They'd acknowledge it's exceptional, but have you got a grip? And are you scrutinising these placements on a child-by-child basis at a senior level? They're now scrutinised by the Director of Safeguarding in Care, Gail Hancock, which does give it senior management oversight on every occasion.
Thank you. I see we have Jill Horrobin here. Is that right? Does she want to say something? Perhaps she should, about the fostering aspect of this.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody. I also plan to be succinct, like Andy was in relation to the commissioned report, and to hopefully give you all assurance in terms of placements with connected persons, and that means family and friends, so those known to children that enter our care and are placed with connected people, that whilst the outcome of the audit was limited assurance, and indeed the follow-up audit carried out last year further identified continued shortfalls, I've provided some assurance in terms of the outcome within this follow-up audit, that there is significant management oversight across a number of areas, which I hope provide assurance that compliance amongst all our colleagues within children's social care is high, but that there are a number of mechanisms that I've highlighted in the management response, which continues to enable us to be assured that there is compliance. So we've got a checklist that is used for all children who enter care, and compliance around placement with connected people in terms of it being regulated is one of those factors that we look at. The Fostering Improvement Action Plan has a number of facets within it, including the implementation of champions from the fostering service, working closely with our colleagues in assessment and safeguarding, to continue to highlight the aspects of the legislation that are relevant here and what actions need to take place to ensure placements are regulated and children are safe. And in addition, spot checks, which I personally and some of my colleagues undertake in relation to all new entrants to care. I can pick up very easily all those children who enter care in a place with connected people, and without exception, I look at all the case files for those children and check along with my colleague Tammy Wintley, who's Head of Service for Fostering, that we're compliant in terms of this aspect of practice. I can also report in relation to the overarching accelerated improvement plan that additional mechanisms are being put into place from the beginning of February around an entry to care panel to examine all entrants into the care system, including children placed with connected persons. And Gail Hancock, as the Director of Safeguarding, and her colleague Philip Segurola, Assistant Director of Safeguarding, will be chairing those panels. So there's yet another mechanism in place from the beginning of February, over and above those we've cited already, to ensure compliance in this particular area of practice. So happy to take any questions at all as appropriate, Chair.
Thank you very much. In your report, there's a lot of what I would call procedural stuff and compliance requirements. I think I would hope that since some children need to be placed fairly quickly with foster parents because they're at risk from other aspects of being brought up, that the children's social workers get the opportunity fairly quickly after that child has been placed to visit the home and to talk independently to the child. Is that catered for in the bureaucratic arrangements that you've set out?
Yes, that's very clearly enshrined in our legislation around statutory visiting for children. So certainly within the first week of a child's new placement, we'd expect the child to be visited and to be seen alone. But in relation to these particular placements with connected people, you're correct, Chair, in that we have to very swiftly ascertain the appropriateness of the placement for the child, and that's what the viability assessment is there to address, both in terms of the prospective carer's capacity to care safely for the child, including practical factors, but also in terms of determining the child's view around the situation wherever possible. But of course, we want to try and avoid these being emergencies and unplanned. We want to move to a position whereby we're looking at these connected people in advance and using things like family group conferences to identify who these connected people may be.
Thank you. Yes. Any comments or questions, please? Well, thank you, Bill. It's good to hear from you, and also from Andy. I think you may go off and have your lunch or whatever you intend to do. Thank you very much for coming to the committee. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Andy, for managing to get so many of the responsible people and responsible officers onto the meeting. It has extended our meeting beyond what I expected, but Rob, I don't think we're going to have much difficulty with item 12.
Sorry, Nigel, we haven't quite finished. There's still one limited assurance report.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I've got, yes, it's Ian on direct awards. I do apologise, Ian. I had you on the peripheral vision of my. Please,
that's okay.
Ian.
My connection was dying, so it seems to be. I'll stay on voice, so you don't have to suffer my face. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to update you, direct awards, as you know, are contracts that are awarded without competition. Sometimes that's permissible, and sometimes very good reason, like the current emergency of COVID. Sometimes it's not advisable, and in loss of competition has the potential to cost us money. These incidents noted by the audit report relate to two specific areas who perhaps should have behaved themselves better. We have improved the controls, so we've introduced a form that requires them to get signatures of myself, the head of legal, and the monitoring officer before they can do direct awards. And we're also going to put back the part of SAP that allows us to track what contracts we have and what's being spent, because that was unfortunately not fully implemented back in 2007. So we're going to do that, and we just keep a weather eye on them. But a lot of it is people should know better. And I think with the controls we put in place, we should be able to get on top of these.
Yes, I'm sure we've got some comments, have we not, from colleagues? I mean, normally the concern is about the scale of the contract, and that's why certain financial thresholds. I wonder, I might ask Rob this, whether the financial thresholds for competition are really low enough. I mean, different councils will probably have smaller councils will have lower thresholds for non-competitive tendering or non-competitive contracting. Rob?
I think Ian's probably better placed to address that than me, Nigel.
Okay, Rob? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Pick that up. Obviously, anything journal of the European Union, we have to compete. And then very much to us for standing orders to be settled. We just been through a whole benchmarking benchmarked ourselves.
Yeah, I think you're cutting in and out.
We stand up fairly well
snapshots
within the logic of that. So what we do is it's above
Ian, I'll come in if that's okay.
5,000 exercises. Am I?
Yeah, you're still breaking up, Ian.
Chair, I'll come in if that's okay.
Full this for me.
Ian, are you okay? If
I'll just... Steve, you take over.
Yeah. All right. What we're setting out, we're going through a procurement transformation plan. Yeah, we're going through a procurement transformation plan and looking at those levels and trying to work out how do we make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. So that if you want to do a direct award on a contract level, let's say at 75 grand, then there is a relative process for you to go through so that we can be reassured that A, we are obtaining value for money, and B, we're going through some due process. What I found in other places is that what we tend not to do is we make it hard for people to do the right thing. So what should happen, at a 50k contract level, is that somebody goes through some sort of soft market test of 3 quotes levels, etc. And actually what they may find is that there isn't the relevant competition at that level for the contract that they're looking at. But actually what they tend to do is jump to a direct award and not go through some sort of competitive process. Actually, by the time you've gone through some mini competitive process, it's as easy to do that as it is to go for an approval to waive the direct award opinion. So that's what we're looking at as part of a procurement transformation process, is actually follow the right process, try and get some quotes if you can, and actually let's stick to the plan A, if you like, and actually making it a little bit more difficult for them to bypass that process and go for a direct award. And that's what we're trying to look at. And actually, as you rightly comment, what level does that pitch at, so that we're not making it too onerous for the low level stuff and making it a bit more onerous for the higher level stuff. And also watching out for we've done 3 different awards to the same contractor to try and get round the values. I've not seen any evidence of that here, but I have seen evidence of that in other places. So I think we need to just watch out for those bits as well. And as Ian rightly points out, keeping up to speed with our management information and intelligence, we've now got the contracts award product that we're starting to populate. The next stage is keeping going on that population and making sure that we're getting that in front of management teams and the senior management team, and also the portfolio holders, to make sure that they're aware of what contracts are being let and what contracts are coming up for renewal. I think there's a long way to go on that process, and we're starting to pick those off as time moves forward.
Yeah, historical knowledge is very important, isn't it? Keeping that on certain contracts, whether they performed well any problems with them, and so on, because where there are there's a limited range of contractors, you really want good information about how they've performed. Okay. Sorry,
Chair, just one other challenge that I think is relevant in this forum is also looking at the local spend, because I'm very keen to push on that and try and increase the number of contracts, low level, medium level contracts that are awarded to local providers. And I think that's one of the things that we'll be looking at as part of the procurement transformation plan. And there's always a balance in terms of the effort that we need to put in to help our local providers obtain those contracts. Thank us for doing too much for the lower level stuff, but I also need to try and help them to on some of the bigger frameworks. I know there's been some limited success in that in the past, and we need to keep pushing that as we move forward in the kind of transformation procurement line.
Thank you. Fine. Ray.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, one of the part of the report mentions the European procurement arrangements that presumably we are now subject to all European tendering and procurement arrangements.
We are not.
Is that correct?
Yes, we've moved out of, there's no OJU anymore, but there's now the UK procurement arrangements, which you might find very similar in many respects in the recruitment. So the terminology, for example, has gone on state aid, but it is a requirement for international subsidy control, which when I've looked at the detail looks very similar to what we would have classed for state aid. So I think the terminology has changed, but the requirements are still very similar.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ian. Sorry, the technology didn't quite work brilliantly, but thank you for your intervention, Steve. I'm sure that's what we wanted to know. Right. That concludes that particular item. It's over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. When I was reviewing the Constitution last year, one of the things that I noticed is that the whistleblowing policy is meant to come to this committee once a year for a review, and I was conscious that's not something I've done since taking over in the role in October 2019. So I'm remedying that with this report, and it'll now become an annual fixture on the agenda. I think it's just worth me reflecting that, as the report says, there are 3 layers to our whistleblowing policy. So the things that come to my attention really only the top level ones, where either somebody is exhausted the other processes or for whatever reason have chosen to come to me direct. So this is by no means the picture of all the whistleblowing that goes on during the organisation, but it is those instances where it's come directly to my attention. They're very few in number, and as you can see from the information I provided, a high proportion of them are found to be without substance when we look into them. And in some cases as well, there are issues that do have some substance behind them, but have already been dealt with by other means. And obviously, if those result in disciplinary action against a member of staff, it's not always possible to make that more widely known. So in some instances, what we have is a member of staff complaining about a colleague or a manager. We know internally that issue has already been dealt with, but the individual making the complaint isn't necessarily aware. Given the small number, it's difficult to talk in terms of trends and patterns. I don't think we have enough instances and incidents to be able to do that, but I have tried to give you a flavour of what's crossed my desk in the past year in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions you've got. The other thing I'd draw your attention to is we are subscribed to Protect, formerly known as Public Concern at Work, who are a whistleblowing charity and experts in best practice in the field. And they've produced a benchmarking toolkit to help us identify where our practice is at. And I'm recommending that we complete that benchmarking exercise over the coming year, and that forms the basis of my report back to you next year, if not sooner. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I hadn't heard of Protect before. They're a national charity, yes?
They are, yeah.
Okay. Yes. Are there any comments or questions about the whistleblowing policy? I guess how the complaints or reports from members are dealt with is quite important, isn't it? I mean, as you say, a lot of them are dismissed because they're highly personal, they're historic, or they're not to work or something of that kind. It's just that people who make complaints, who've got if you like, a bee in their bonnet, if they don't feel their complaint has been handled satisfactorily, they can do quite a lot of damage to the reputation of the authority. So I suppose this organisation Protect gives advice on how these complaints should be handled. Does it?
It gives us a whole range of issues, including that. Yes, I have to say that instances where what you might regard as abuse of the policy have been few and far between in my experience. I'm sure they occur, but actually it's not been a particular issue during the past year.
So we're asked to support the commitment to undertake a self-assessment against the Protect Best Practice Framework. I'm sure we'll support that. There have been no naysays on that issue. Thank you, Rob. Fine. Simon, final item on the agenda. Simon Harper, the Independent Persons Report. I saw he's there. Simon, where are you?
He's just
Oh, you are there.
Right, I was just having at that moment my iPad had been running thoughtlessly through the whole meeting, and then it decided to have a little bit of a connection issue. So just for the benefit of members of the public that may be watching on YouTube, Simon Harper, Head of Democratic Services, and this is just a very simple report for you in terms of the appointment of independent persons. Fortunately, our independent persons haven't had to do any formal activity, but they are a crucial part of the council democratic process. And I know that Rob Ayliff, as monitoring officer, uses them from time to time when there are any complaints against councils. Unfortunately, we've managed to deal with those without anything having to be dealt with formally. So all this report is doing is asking you to note that we need to go through a process to appoint new independent persons. John Milner has said that he will carry on for a short period to allow the new people to bed in, which is very kind of him. Graham Borden now wants to retire from the role. So we need to go through a interview process involving lead members. So that will be the chair of the committee, the vice chair, and one other representing the political groups. So we're just asking you to note that process, and then the formal appointment will be at the annual meeting of council in May. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Well, we note the process. I'm sure we're quite happy with that. Rob, I notice independent persons aren't mentioned in the whistleblowing policy. Is there a case for, or would you not do this, putting them in as an additional level? Because they are outside the organisation, where nearly everybody mentioned there has something to do with the county council.
The role of independent persons is usually limited to dealing with complaints against members under the Code of Conduct and against senior officers within the council. There's no reason that we couldn't consult them more widely on other issues. But actually, what's proven to be more useful on the whistleblowing front is being able to draw on some of the council's internal resources, so colleagues in audit and in HR, which tends to be more the kind of issues that come up.
Yeah, I suppose it might open up a can of worms where their particular expertise doesn't really help resolve the issues. But yes, okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions to Simon? Now we've got him here eventually and his iPad is working. No? Will shakes his head.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
In that case, well, I would have said if it had been a normal meeting in person, well, we've done tolerably well to get to by 1 o'clock. I have to apologise. It has been a very long meeting, and I didn't expect this one online to take quite so long. But then we've had an exceptional number of managers come and give their accounts, which I think we probably should do. So I'm going to say thank you very much for everybody for your contributions and your attendance, and hope you can enjoy the rest of the nice day.